Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
I've always considered myself to be a caring head teacher who acts sensitively to support staff mental health. But what I found increasingly difficult was managing the negative impact on staff mental health when resolving issues related to their employment or daily work. Heartfelt Leadership has been developed by Teachwell Toolkit as a handbook to support head teachers to overcome the challenges of school improvement while supporting staff well-being. We know that difficult conversations can quickly turn into conflict if procedures are not fully transparent, understood and followed. Our handbook takes you through step-by-step processes while maintaining mutual respect, avoiding conflict and finding solutions.
At Bloomsbury Education, we're passionate about supporting teachers with high-quality professional development books from leading experts. Whether you're navigating your first crucial years as an early career teacher or a more experienced teacher looking to refresh your practice or take a step up into leadership, our award-winning books are here to help. We publish practical books to support teaching across primary and secondary, from the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design. Visit the Bloomsbury Education website at bloomsbury.com/education to find out more and use code BLOOMTTR24 to save 20% on all education titles. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Nathan, and welcome everybody to TTR for a chat about cold calling in part one, and then maybe later on, depending on how long that takes, we'll also talk about jobs outside of teaching versus jobs inside of teaching, and whether how we rate teaching against jobs outside of teaching at the moment, because I posted a advert for a job on my social media last week, and the response was really sort of, I wouldn't say surprising, but it was one of those again where people were saying, wow, can you where is this job, share the link, and really commenting on the favourable conditions of this job, which was an entry-level job. I'll talk about that job later on in the second half of the show, but that's what sort of drove me to maybe explore that a little bit more. It's something I've explored on previous Teachers Talk Radio shows, where I've talked to guests who have left teaching to work in, for example, an Amazon warehouse or an edtech company, or all these other roles and jobs. So I have explored that before, but I thought maybe we'd just look at that entry-level job and maybe compare it like for like to an entry-level teaching job to see where a graduate or even somebody who's maybe 5-10 years into their working life might sit when it comes to that job versus teaching. Even if they wanted to teach, where would they put that with that? So that'll be in part two. Part one tonight, we're obviously going to hopefully dig into cold calling, and yeah, it'll be interesting to be able to explore that as a concept, because what I'll do is I'll try to begin with to introduce listeners to, again, why I've decided to talk on this Monday evening about cold calling. What was it? Why have I chosen that beyond any other consideration? I'm also going to invite and open the floor up to anybody who wishes to call in, anybody who wishes to get involved. This is Teachers Talk Radio. We do lead the education conversation. This conversation is open to anyone and everyone who wants to call in and offer their opinion or offer any insights on what we're discussing this evening. So that's the plan. Just before I kick off on an introduction to cold calling and what that's all about, I would like to draw your attention to our sponsor this evening, which is Teachwell Toolkit. If you haven't heard of Teachwell Toolkit, they are a multi-award-winning company who specialise in equipping school communities to build a culture of staff and pupil mental health. Now, one of the key things that they provide is fully funded, DFE-approved senior mental health lead training. So if there's somebody in your school who wishes to embark on senior mental health lead training on the programme, you can get involved by just visiting teachwelltoolkit.com. That's teachwelltoolkit.com, and finding out more by just dropping Steve and Tanita a line about that. I thought maybe before I get into the introduction around cold calling, might be good to introduce my guest this evening, who'll certainly be here for a chunk of the evening, which is Miss Eunice. Now, I stupidly didn't ask Miss Eunice her first name. So, Miss Eunice, do you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself for everybody?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for inviting me this evening. So my name is
Pleasure.
Zainab.
Excellent. Good. Do you want to introduce yourself, your role, what you do?
Yeah, so it's my 7th year teaching primary. I'm currently teaching year 3, and I'm at the library lead at a primary school in Birmingham.
Okay. And is it central Birmingham? Is it outskirts of Birmingham?
Central Birmingham. I
Central,
don't want
right
to
in the
give
middle.
the exact. Let's not. I
No,
won't give
don't
the
name the school. Don't name the school. But it's right. The point I'm getting at is right in the epicenter. It's right where all the fun happens.
Just outside where the fun happens. So I think you can work it out now.
No, I can't. There's probably about 1,000 primary schools in Birmingham. But anyway, so you are. Did you say you're in your 7th year?
Yeah, it's my 7th year teaching.
And have you always taught in year 3?
I would love to stay in year 3. I've experienced year 2 and back to year 3 again.
Okay, so is that now? Hang on, you're testing me now because I am key stage ignorant here. But key stage 1 would be early years
up to year 2.
Year 1, year 2. Yeah, that's right. So you're sort of flitting between key stage 1 and 2.
Yeah, I've experienced year 5 as well, but my personal preference is year 3, the age group, the innocence.
Why is that? Oh, they're more innocent.
More innocent, and I love the development, seeing them grow coming up from key stage 1. It's such a huge difference by the end of year 3 to actually see that and witness that. So it's just my personal favourite.
And what's your favourite subject to teach as a primary teacher within that sort of year 3?
As the library lead, I'm going to say reading.
Yeah. What does the library lead involve? What is that role?
The library lead involves firstly arranging trips to our local library, which is the Hall Green Library. We're hoping that it doesn't get shut down. Making sure that the children have that experience, because me as a child and a lot of children that come into our schools, they haven't actually visited a library before.
Yeah.
So those extracurricular opportunities to develop reading for pleasure. And then it's timetabling library sessions for all of the children across school to make sure the library is not just a pretty building, it's being used. And we've also got lunchtime sessions, which the wonderful year 6 children help out with.
Got you. Okay, that's great. So what we're going to do, Zainab, is hopefully we're going to discuss cold calling in the main. But before that, I saw actually a tweet that you put out just over the weekend, and I thought it'd be worth just circling onto that before we kick off on cold calling, because it was quite an interesting tweet. You said, do you know what? You've posted it before, haven't you? You've posted it twice.
It's always been my pinned tweet. It's always been my pinned tweet.
Yeah. I didn't realize that until I've just looked now, because I saw you tweet. I didn't realize it was also. Why is it? So why do you love this? I'll just read so everyone listening to this as a podcast knows what we're talking about. You put a quote out. It says, "Children learn best when they like their teacher and they think their teacher likes them." And your commentary was controversial tweet of the day: "If you don't like kids, please don't teach primary." Now, I find that interesting because when you say, I mean, I find it interesting. Like, go on, tell me about it. Tell me why do you feel strongly about this quote? Because obviously you must do if you've pinned it and you tweeted it like 16 times since 2020.
It's something that I've personally always felt passionate about, because I feel like teaching is not a normal. It's not a normal job, in the sense that I'm not just talking about the workload side of things, the after hours that we do. I feel that we've got a responsibility to the children that we teach, and kids pick up on whether they're liked or not. And when I say liked, I'm not talking about trying to be their friend. I'm talking about they feel listened to, they feel respected and cared for, which is fostering that positive learning environment that we all strive for. So having come across in, like, I guess in all professions, you come across people who are unhappy, but I feel like with teaching, especially primary. I specifically mentioned primary because I've got no experience of secondary, but I feel like to create that positive learning environment, the children need to feel like them.
Yeah, you're just cutting out very slightly, Zainab. I'm not sure
Sorry.
if that's your Wi-Fi or phone, or I don't know, but it's all right. We can still hear you. Yeah, okay. So, do you think though? I mean, I would think that I think all teachers would would like working with young people to go into teaching. Um, I guess one of the interesting elements of that would be though, do you think it's important that they like all the students they teach?
That's a tricky one. I think they need to make all the children feel like they like them in order to build that nurturing environment. I think the children need to feel, but naturally, as humans, I mean, there's people that we there's people that we like, there's people that we dislike. I guess it's the same with children as well. But I think it's really important for the children to not feel that and not sense that. It's something that's really difficult to fake as well, because I look back to my own childhood, and I guess that's one of the reasons why I feel so passionately about this. I knew which teachers didn't like me. I didn't always make the right choices, but for the teachers that made me feel like they did, I tried that little bit harder. It's about increasing their engagement and making them want to be there.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, I think it's great if you really like teaching a class. There's nothing can beat it, and the
Yep.
individuals in a class, the feeling's fantastic when you got that amazing relationship with them, and every lesson's great. It's fantastic. But I do think that sometimes, as you say, if we're applying that in a blanket sense,
Yes.
then sometimes you have to pretend to like them.
I mean,
To play devil's advocate. I mean,
it sounds harsh to say, but it's the reality.
well,
Meaning,
yeah, of course it is, because as an adult, let's imagine you're an adult. You're not going to like every adult you ever meet, are you? So,
exactly
so,
what
so it's
we've got.
exactly the same, and obviously the thing is there as well. If you're a secondary school teacher, you're going to have contact with like 300-400 students if you're full time and you've got a full time, so you're going to have access to loads and loads of students. So it's probably unrealistic to say to that teacher that we expect you to like them all, and if you don't, then you're not in some ways a good teacher or as good as the next teacher. Well, not necessarily, because they're just human, you know. But yeah, but I was interested in the quote. But I don't know whether, I mean, so have you ever disliked some students you've taught, and how have you dealt with that? Have
I
you
I found some students more difficult than others. I wouldn't say I've ever disliked a child. I found it harder to connect. So with those children in my classroom, I've had to make that extra effort with them to make sure that they feel cared for, and I have noticed an improvement in their behavior and in their attitude. I'm not saying suddenly the next day everything was perfect, because in reality that's never the case in education, but they did try.
do you know what, Zainab? I'm gonna be controversial. I'm gonna say
Go on.
that I am gonna say that in my career that there have unfortunately been students, not many,
Yeah.
but have been students that I have not liked. Has it impacted my teaching? Has it impacted the way I treat them? I would really hope not. In terms of the approach I've taken, in terms of always being professional, always having that positive regard, treating all students the same in that way, I don't think it has. But being honest, sometimes, and this is where we're probably different. Is you said you've never disliked a student. Sometimes you struggle to connect with the student, and
Yes.
that's the reason. And I would say that sometimes I've struggled to connect with the student. That's also true, but also sometimes, and I suppose sometimes you could look at it and say, well, you know, the way I try to frame it as myself is, I dislike your behaviors, but I don't dislike you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So
That's the way I will always try and frame it to myself. you know, and I'll say, look, it's almost like you're a professional. And I'm not saying teaching some like big chess game or something, but
Yeah, of
but I
course.
am saying that you have to get your game face on. And, you know,
Yes.
you have to say, hang on a minute, this is my job. And what I need to do is control my mentality, my attitude, and my approach to all the students. That's part of the job. So where I'm agreeing with you is probably you've got to control the way you approach students, but also the bit I would not, I think disagree is the wrong word, but the bit I would question is you saying that the reason that you've never disliked a student, which is great, by the way, and maybe it's because they're cute, they're in year 3.
I mean, they
Really...
keep me well entertained. I mean, I really respect your honesty. We all have different experiences, and you have been teaching a lot longer than me.
Well, no, you've done 7 years. To say that you, or however long it is, it might be more than that. I mean, I'm pretty sure there was probably a student I disliked in my first year. I'm just thinking back to my training year now when students were telling me to F off. I'm pretty sure I probably thought, I dislike you in this moment.
Thankfully, I haven't had the F off experiences at primary. I think that's probably why I prefer working with year 2 and year 3.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, we could circle around on this debate. That could make a whole show. So we'll park that for a minute. Let's talk about cold calling, right? Now, just to give people who are listening back to this, and there's some great listeners, by the way, and I just want to give a shout out to some people who have listened to my last, I think, 3 or 4 shows in a row. So Rebecca was listening to my last 2 or 3 shows all the way through, certainly my last show, and I'm pretty sure some others. So I want to give a shout out to Rebecca. Thank you very much for listening to this live. Obviously, if anyone listens to my shows as a podcast back and listens to a lot of them, hey, I see you, even though I don't. So thank you. But Rebecca, I'm going to give you a shout out in the live. And also, I'm going to give a shout out to Scientific, who often listens in. We've got also Paul, Mr. C, the other Paul Foz. We've got Peter. We've got Mr. Green. We've got D. We've got Gurjit. We've got Zach. We've got Mr. Das, who is a regular TTR listener. Welcome to you. Chris, part of the TTR team. And of course, Emily as well. Emily's here. And Zainab, the guest, right? So big shout out to everyone listening along. Little introduction to cold call. The term cold call is, for anyone who doesn't know, we've got international listeners who might not have heard of this phrase. It's part of the Teach Like a Champion repertoire of techniques. Now it's been termed in that repertoire cold call. It's been named cold call, right? Now, Zainab, you can sort of come in a minute and you can tell me if you've got a different definition than this one. But I've tried to, look at the TLAC definition, but also just think about, think about simplifying that even further. Cold calling is where you, in the classroom, rather than doing a hands-up policy where students can put their hands up and you pick one to answer, or rather than doing a strategy where, say, for example, a random name generator, or like the random name generator machines where you can put all the names in there and it'll pick one out to answer the question. Rather than that, it's neither of those. This is about having all the students needing to opt in to being able to answer a question, and then the teacher randomly selecting a student and asking them a question. And then this is where it gets a little bit, I guess if you take it on how it is written in TLAC, it would be a case of the student is expected to answer. There isn't an opt-out. But I think that I'm pretty sure that the vast majority, even schools that are using this technique to the letter, wouldn't necessarily expect if a student said, for example, I don't know, they wouldn't keep going, well, you don't know, you need to answer. I'm just going to mute you for a second, Zainab. There's a little bit of
sure.
So they wouldn't necessarily say, I don't know. If they said, I don't know if that school would suggest that, well, if a student says, I don't know to a question, you have to keep going and going and going with the same student until you get an answer, right, that you want. I think that's I would struggle to think that's what works in any environment. But certainly, this idea of cold call is certainly used, and it's used readily. Now, I've picked on two particular blogs to sort of highlight the divide, if you like, on the issue of cold calling. One is by Tom Sherrington and one is by Phil Beadle. Now, you'll remember that in fact, this was this month, 2 years ago, I interviewed Phil Beadle about slant, which is another TLAC technique. Definitely look that up if you haven't seen it. It's a very interesting interview. But Phil Beadle has an opinion about cold call within the sort of arena of TLAC and that repertoire of activities. That cold call is, well, to quote Phil Beadle, mechanistic, stilted, inorganic, and deeply inauthentic. Now, I'm quite surprised that I'm intelligent enough to read those words, if I'm honest with you. But I've just about managed it. But that's how Phil describes it in the blog that he has written on the subject of cold call. Now, I'll delve into Phil's blog a little bit more, but that's the bottom line. He also says that he says it's worth observing that calling a technique for teaching children cold call, which is a direct marketing technique from call centers, is likely to result in it being as unwanted by the children as a cold call generally is by an adult. Cold call, where you pick on a specific student to answer a question, followed by no opt-out when you refuse to accept that they don't know what they don't know, was adopted by Doug Lemov from a technique used at Harvard Business School. And again, he says he's always felt that technique was mechanistic, stilted, inorganic, and deeply unauthentic. Now, that is in stark contrast to someone like Tom Sherrington, who says that cold calling is the number one strategy for inclusive classrooms, whether remote or in person. What a stark contrast that is. And I think that shows you how divided the views are on techniques like this. I think it goes much further than the technique. I think this dwells into politics. I think this dwells into how they view the role of, how someone would view the role of schools and education. You know, there's a lot more to it than the technique, but it certainly brings up those feelings, doesn't it? Because the language in these blogs. So Tom Sherrington went in this blog where he talks about it being the number one strategy for inclusive classrooms. He says that based on his experience of working as a head teacher and in lots of schools, he suggests that it has the biggest impact on the overall effectiveness of lessons as a routine, as a questioning strategy, cold calling. So that's really strong from Tom Sherrington in his blog. Now, he presents two scenarios in the blog about cold calling. He says that in scenario A, the class is dominated by questioning where the teacher engages primarily with students who volunteer with hands up or simply calling out. It's the norm, and it can seem lively on the surface, but nearly always it's just a few students who dominate while others are marginal, passive, and silent. Now, I am pretty sure that a critic of cold calling would say to Tom Sherrington there that they do that anyway without cold calling. So, for example, if you do, I don't know, a random name generator, or even just a hands up approach, as a teacher, I guess, as an autonomous professional, you can judge in a situation who is dominating the lesson. You can judge without any strategy like cold calling. You can look around and you can say, well, we're 15 minutes into the lesson. I've noticed over here, I've got Mark and Sally who are constantly, sort of engaging a lot more than the other students, and they're spending, their voices are dominating the room. And therefore, as a teacher, I need to address that in some sort of way to help that. Now, it could be that the way to address that is through the strategy of cold calling, but it also could just be, I'm going to continue. I'm not saying this is the best way of doing it, by the way, but there will be teachers out there who argue, well, hang on, I'm just going to carry on doing it the way I do it, which is like a hands up or a shout out method or whatever it is. and that works for me, and I'm just going to change the metrics on that. I'm just going to shift how I do it in the classroom to make sure it works for all the students, right? So that's where I think someone would challenge this blog from Tom Sherrington. I'm not saying I would agree with that, by the way. So in this scenario, in scenario B from Tom, he says the class where the teacher nearly always selects who should respond next by name. There's no hands up, there's no calling out. It could be anyone, and this is the norm. Students all anticipate being asked to respond, sharing their thoughts. Everyone mentally prepares an answer to every question in readiness for being selected, and they're all involved. Nobody dominates, and over time, everyone contributes. Now, I think the bit here where, so we posted a poll on Teachers Talk Radio, which I'm sure Nathan can dig out. It was posted a few days ago, maybe a few weeks ago, and it was on the issue of cold calling. And we basically asked listeners, and by the way, I came up with the poll question, and that got a bit battered because I used the word problematic in it, which I think some people didn't like. But anyway, I apologize for that. But basically, the question was, is the strategy of cold calling problematic? And around 75% said no, it's not. But around, I think it was like 30% maybe versus 60 or something, versus 70 said that it is problematic. So that's quite a hefty percentage. I mean, over 2,000 people voted in the poll. I know it's not scientific or anything like that, but the TTR audience is predominantly people in education, at least. So if you think 30% of those think that cold calling is problematic, so I think that's quite a high percentage. And then you'll have the people within there who say, no, cold calling is not problematic, but it could be problematic. But I've answered, no, it's not, just in the survey, right? So I think it really is very split, actually, on this strategy. Now, if you want my personal view, not the view of TTR or any of our other hosts, to throw my personal view on this, I, unsurprisingly, don't think it's problematic if it is done in what I would term to be a good way. But I mean, really, I wouldn't even use the word good. I would say a normal way, where a teacher is using their discretion, they are using their common sense, they are using their knowledge of the class, they are using the classroom space, they are aware of everybody in the classroom space. They're making sure that if a student doesn't answer. Now, this is where I'm interested, because according to Phil Beadle's blog, and maybe someone else can come in here and tweet us or whatever if I'm wrong here, but he says that there is an opt-in requirement with cold calling. So he's saying that you ask them the question, but it's not just that. You're saying you have to come up with an answer. You have to opt in. You have to come up with something. Now, that's where I don't know whether I'd agree with him if that is the case, but I'd certainly say that if a student says, I don't know, or they don't say anything, well, obviously you'd want to give them thinking time. But let's imagine you give them 20 seconds and then they say, I don't know. Now, I think most teachers will, well, I'll come back to you on that. Or I think the next strategy, well, have a look at what's in front of you. If they've got a booklet or something, have a look. Because one strategy I quite like that I saw was where a teacher said, well, I've got 3 stages. I've got the ask a question. And then my last phase is read what's in front of you that we gave you last lesson, if that will help, if that's helpful to you. Now, some might argue that that's just dumbing it down and giving that student an out. But this teacher was arguing that actually it gives them some access, some point of access. And I would broadly agree with that there's nothing wrong with that. So I don't know whether that would fit with TLAC. I would imagine it probably would, but in Phil Beadle's blog, he sort of suggests that it wouldn't. He sort of suggests that, tough luck. If you get picked and, you're opting in, and we're not going to sort of just let you get away with it, if that makes sense, if you either don't know or you sort of try to opt out in some way. So listen, I've never taught in a school personally that's what I would call a TLAC. Well, I have actually. I've taught in one school that was a TLAC school, but it was only for a few months. And I'll be totally honest with you. I was a bit of a bad boy because I didn't really follow everything within the TLAC sort of repertoire. I just didn't do it. Now, because I was only there temporarily, I think probably the wonderful people in there probably thought, well, we'll just leave Tom alone and let him sort of get on with it a little bit. But I did go along with a lot of it. But, this is what I'm saying. It's different levels, isn't it? There'll be some people who claim that the TLAC strategies are done to the letter. And if there is any sort of deviation of any sort from a set scripted thing, that the teacher and or the student could be in trouble. Do you know what I mean? In a bit of bother. Right. I don't know those schools though. I as I said, I've not worked in a place like that. I've not worked in something where that might happen. Now listen, there's my little introduction to sort of the debate here around cold calling. Now it would be absolutely fantastic and wonderful if anybody, because I think this will be helpful to people listening back, maybe some people who work in schools where they use the cold calling strategy, or they just use, this is the thing, right? Do you know what's funny? I think this is more about it being called cold calling. Because if this wasn't called, if this was just called questioning, or I think one of our listeners actually replied to that poll and said they called it something else. They call it like, I'll have to look it up. It was like spot feedback or something they call it. On the spot feedback. I don't know. It was something like that, right? And I genuinely think if you called it something else, that people just wouldn't be that bothered. I genuinely do. I think, and also I think because somebody has created this as part of something they've created, I think that sometimes just winds people up. It shouldn't, but it does. It's like, I didn't come up with the phrase cold calling. Honestly, genuinely, I think there's a part of it. Maybe that's me being cynical, but I think there's a part of it where people say, I wish I'd have copyrighted cold calling. But because I can't copyright it, I'm just going to dig it out every time I see it. Right? Maybe that's me being cynical, but I think there's an element of that. I think there's an element of, someone comes up with something, someone didn't come up with it before they did, and they don't like it because of that. Or, for example, someone comes up with a name for something that's always existed, but they reframe it. And some people respond to that and go, oh, okay, then. And other people respond to it by saying, I guess on a scale of, that's a bit of a buzzword that we don't need, all the way down to, I hate this. And every time I see it, I'm going to batter anybody who says it, not physically, obviously. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's where I think this one becomes a bit of a personal thing sometimes. I think it becomes individual teachers and their approach to things. It dwells into everything. And also it comes back to that idea that has been expressed by commentators on one side of the debate, that the sort of authoritarian, teacher-led, scripted sort of approach isn't good or right or effective. And then on the other side, there are those who would say, well, number one, it's necessary. Number two, it works. And number three, there are professionals who can implement it in a very professional way out there, right? Because that's the thing, I've just said it myself there, and I'm sure there'll be many people listening to this who would be the same. How many schools have I worked in or worked in for long enough to see the strategy getting played out? Now, that particular school I worked in, which was in the Midlands, I observed teachers teaching there, and they were absolutely brilliant, right? They used all of these particular strategies in the classroom, and I saw them working. Now, listen, there might be someone else who could have observed that same lesson and said, I don't like the style of this. I don't like the feel of it. But in my opinion of watching that, it was working for that teacher and it was working for those students in that context. And you could argue that that's all that matters, right? In these debates, that's all that matters. You could argue that. So it's very interesting. Zainab, I don't know if you're still there. Now, you have, I think you were mentioning that you have written something to do with I don't know whether it was a PhD, but it was something on cold calling. I don't know whether you can unmute yourself again and tell me what you were doing around cold calling.
Hi, Tom. Sorry, no.
I hope you liked my introduction there.
I did actually. It was a great summary, and I really agree with you. I think one of the problems in this is the term itself, cold calling. I think, like, in reality, cold calling is target questioning. It's not something that we can just suddenly do. I learnt that quite early on. So we actually use the walkthrough books for our professional development as part of our training at school. So I think it was in my second year, I chose for my target, I chose to focus on cold calling. And I quickly learned that there's a lot more involved than that. It's not just simply a no hands up classroom. You've got to have that buy-in from the kids, and you've got to be flexible with it as well. So the way that I tried to speak to my class about it, I said that I want to hear what you've all got to say. And very early on, I realized that it can't be used for everything. And then I've had to develop things and put things in place to make sure I'm not making any children feel anxious or put on the spot. So with any of the children that I knew would struggle with it, we've just got little things in place. So put your hands under the table if you're not feeling confident enough. And I think for children, they really need to understand that cold calling is not just checking if you're paying attention to the lesson. It's more about, I want to hear what you've got to say, and then giving lots of children the opportunity to speak. So I found it very, very beneficial, but of course not on its own, used as target questioning strategy.
So do you use it alongside other questioning? So,
of course, yeah.
But this is the point, Zainab. I think that the criticism is, and this is true, that there are schools out there who say, this is our strategy, this is what we do, and in every lesson, 100% of the time, you're going to see cold calling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand that, but I struggle to personally implement that in my classroom for every single lesson. So that there is an element of, I don't like the term, but cold calling, but not all the time. You've got to be flexible with it depending on the needs of your children.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. But as I say, that is the criticism, isn't it? That there isn't flexibility. So
Yes.
I'm interested in your classroom though. When you use it as a strategy, okay, how do you manage it when a student says, like, almost, you ask a student a question, like, how do you manage opt-out?
The opt-out will be, meaning that if genuinely the child doesn't know, I'll move on, I'll come back to you, get a few more examples, and then I will go back to that child because I've given them a little bit more thinking time. But of course, if the child is anxious, or we've had prior conversations where I would never have asked the child to put their hands under the desk because that was our code, that was our system.
Do you know what, Zainab, what you've just described? That's good teaching, isn't it?
I think it's just something that you develop with time. Like, you can't put a word on it, but I think every single classroom is unique in its own way. And we've just got to, when we implement strategies like that, we've just got to tailor them to our needs.
But also what you've described there, you're in your 7th, 8th year of teaching, or whatever it is. So you have, from your response there, I can tell straight away that you have that understanding of sort of, I mean, I don't want to necessarily call it common sense, but you've got that experience to say, okay, this is how I'm going to manage this situation. I'm going to let them have a think. I mean, I totally agree with you. So where I would be looking at it is going, right, okay, don't worry about it. Let's just call him John for the sake of it. Don't worry about it, John. You know, I'm going to come back to you, in 5-10 minutes. Have a little listen to what we're gonna go through now, and maybe have a little look what's in front of you as well. Just recap yourself on what we're talking about, and I'll come back to you in 5-10 minutes, and then move on to the next person, right? And then come back to them in 4 question time, but not in a humiliating, let's put John on the spot sort of way, but just to John, I'm just checking in with you. Did that help? And he'll go, yeah, I think so. And you go, well, what did you pick up from what they've said? And then he'll answer, and I just see that as good teaching, if that makes sense. And this is where, if you look at any sort of teaching, and I say any teaching technique, if you look at a lot of teaching techniques and you write them down on a piece of paper and you give it to someone who's never set foot in a classroom, or at the very least hasn't set foot in particular classroom contexts, and you say, okay, here's a teaching technique, and you put it down in very cold, hard language on a piece of paper, this is what we do, this is what happens, they might read that and go, that's just not fair. That's just not right. That's too hard. That's too, But then when you actually listen to a practitioner like you talk about a strategy, that's where straight away, well, I would pick it up. I'm sure all the teachers listening here will pick it up and go, yeah, I know exactly what Zainab's talking about, right? But there may be others who don't have that contextual domain knowledge to know this is how classrooms, this is good teaching. This is what good teaching is, right? So it doesn't matter whether you use the cold call strategy or not. I think, like you've just described, you've said the cold call strategy can be an effective strategy. I mean, what percentage, Zainab, would you say you use the cold call strategy versus other questioning strategy? Like, do you use it? What other strategies do you use when it's the whole class? I mean,
so it depends upon the lesson. So I will, like, sometimes I'll ask for a whole class response. A lot of the time I'll give them opportunities to obviously think, pair, share, and speak to their partner first before they speak to me. Yeah. I would say about 70% of the time.
Yeah.
Approximately. Not that I've measured it.
Yeah. Do you ever use hands up anymore as a strategy?
I have used hands up when I've posed a question and I can see, like, the children looking quite anxious, so quite a few struggling. So then I have used hands up in the past. But less.
Yeah,
because I've always found the same children to have their hands up, and in the end of the day, we want to build on the children's oracy skills and their confidence.
There will be those who will say, though, that the cold calling strategy in its purest form is anxiety inducing and therefore should be avoided.
I think that just depends on obviously getting to know the kids, and of course, even when if we're called upon, say it's a training session or something, there are things that induce anxiety, but then it's up to us to foster that learning environment and create that inclusive environment where every child feels able to. I mean, it's what we strive for. I'm not saying that it happens, but we're striving for creating that environment where the children are comfortable, whether they are right or wrong, to respond.
Yeah. Listen, I want to invite, by the way, anyone else who's in the live. We've got so many great people in here. If anybody wants to get involved, there's a little icon in the bottom left, the mic symbol. If you want to share your view on this, or your take on cold calling as a strategy, then just hit that symbol, and then we can bring you in as a speaker with myself and Zainab, and you can have your say on this as well. And just while on that note, I will also mention again our sponsors tonight. That's Teachwell Toolkit. If you haven't heard of them, they provide senior mental health lead programs. So anybody in your school who wants to train as a mental health first aid instructor, they can get that training fully funded for free through teachwelltoolkit.com. So if you're interested in that, all you have to do is go to their website, drop them a line. It's Steve and Sunita who run it. and say, I'm interested in the senior mental health lead program, and I'm interested in a member of our staff getting the qualification. It's fully funded by the DFE. Can I get it? And I'm sure they'd be more than happy to speak to you and set something up with your school or organization or whatever it is that wherever it is you sort of work. So yeah, that's our sponsor, and a massive thank you to Teach Well Toolkit for sponsoring TTR at the moment. That's absolutely great. So yeah, I mean, I've got another question, Zainab, in that, do you think that the cold call strategy, because it's really great you teach primary, right? Because there will be those out there who say that a strategy like cold calling, it gets progressively more problematic as you go down the years, right? So like, the more anxiety inducing, I guess it might be to somebody who's in year 3 as opposed to somebody who's in year 11 or something, right? So do you sort of buy into that idea?
I do agree. I do agree with that, because the children are younger, but then I think one way to counter that would be to model that making mistakes is okay to the children. So I think that anxiety comes from, oh no, what if I say the wrong answer? What will my teacher think of me? What will my friends think of me? So again, it's all building that inclusive environment where we are giving them the confidence. I've never tried. I don't know how it would work lower down. I've never been in reception or year 1. But in year 2, it was more difficult than in year 3.
Why is that?
I think, again, because of the age group of the children. But once they understood, I think they've got to understand the purpose behind it and why we are doing it. Because these children coming into the classroom, they are used to putting their hands up all the time. So suddenly it's a huge change for them.
Yeah, well, this is it, isn't it? So do you think that part of this is about training the students into an approach over time, rather than just sort of jumping into that approach?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So I think training them in gradually, taking small steps, would be much more beneficial for them in the long run.
We've got Scientific in again. Scientific, how are you this evening?
Hello, hi, I hope you can hear me. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to speak. Sorry to sort of butt in, but it
No,
was such an
go.
interesting conversation that you were having there. Yeah, I just want to try and remember the points I wanted to make. I mean, first of all, what Zainab said about aspiring to a particular way of teaching or response from the students is a really good point, because if you're going to use something like cold calling effectively, and I don't claim to be the expert in any way, but surely you need that buy-in, and that's something that you aspire to. It doesn't mean you're going to do it 100% of the time from the word go. So I think people who pick up on cold calling as a strategy, like you say, who may not have that direct experience, may misunderstand that, in that students they think are going to be forced 100% of the time to be put on the spot, which of course isn't the case. And the second thing I'll just quickly say is I remember my own training, it was some time ago now, but it was always drilled into us that if you got the answer, I don't know, it was then up to you to rephrase the question, moderate the level of the question, drop it down to a level where that student can understand, and then you end up building the confidence of that student, which is surely then going to feed into better classroom environment further down the line. So it's an aspiration rather than us all forcing students to be on the spot all the time.
I think you make a good point about adapting questioning. That's not something I have mentioned in this whole show, is that idea of adapting the command words, and even going as far as sort of making it just so easy for a student to opt in, right, and access sometimes. giving them that opportunity to be able to answer,
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to empower the students at the end of the day, aren't you? I mean, I know if currently the situation I'm in, as people, I have mentioned before, my school's in special measures, it's very, very, very challenging. But I do feel that if I'm never using cold calling, I do feel like I'm kind of letting the students down, because I know that although some people view cold calling as not always equitable to everybody, actually, if you never use cold calling, then there's going to be students day in, day out who are not having an effective chance to get involved in the learning, perhaps you could argue.
Let me read out some comments we've had. So Chris has texted in, Chris Passy. For me, it's about context and setting expectations. I'm a Senko, and my students with ASD and ADHD really benefit from the structure and aspiration that the correct delivery of cold calling can bring. So that was a comment there. Rebecca says, thinking of Vygotsky's ZPD, I believe there is more for a teacher to learn, i.e. formative assessment, when students generate and ask their peers questions. And then there is to learn from a teacher cold calling a few students. Rebecca, feel free to call in and sort of explain that point a bit further. Mr. Green says, teacher cold calls a student, I don't know. Teacher, okay, tell me something you do know. And we've also had Peter, who has texted in and said, not problematic at all. From Peter. Yeah. So, I mean, he's probably referring to the survey that we carried out on cold calling. We've got Mara as well. Scientific again. Can I just ask you what other strategies you use apart from, do you still use hands up and call out and stuff like that? Or do you like random name generators or anything like that? Or do you just use cold call in your lessons?
Well, I don't just use cold calling, no. And sometimes it will be the case with certain groups that I have. Sometimes it will just be calling out, which I know is a bit of a no-no. But it just depends what level you're at with each of the students. And some of the classes I teach, that level is still a way below where I really want it to be, if I'm completely honest. But that's the situation, that's the context that I'm in at the moment. But yeah, I'd certainly hands up has its place, and I think always will have its place. So it's a combination, isn't it? I think it's horses for courses, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. We've got Zach who's just jumped in, so I'll just let Zach have his say here. Zach, do you want to unmute yourself? Welcome to TTR.
Thank you. I love what everyone has said so far. I just kind of wanted to point out sometimes where schools are at before cold calling or individual turns or hands down questioning, whatever you want to call it. What they can kind of look like before cold calling really comes in and transforms the classrooms. When I started at the current school I'm at, you'd go into a classroom and the teacher would start explaining something and then say, anybody want to raise your hand? And everybody was just sort of laying low in the classroom, sort of sinking slowly into their seats. And teacher would say, oh, okay, nobody knows. Well, here's the answer. And sort of keep going in that fashion. Does anybody know? No. And students sort of learned, they sort of created a culture in which it was not normal to respond to teacher questions. And when we brought in the cold calling kind of practice, we did all of these nice nuances that have been, brought up. We, for example, start with a turn and talk before a cold call, or start with a core response, or, if you don't know, you ask them, what do you know? Or if you were someone else, could you, what would you say to that question? Right. Sort of warm things like that. And you come into a school like after working through that, and you see everybody just sitting forward, just so much more invested in the learning. I just think it's invaluable.
To play devil's advocate here, Zach, a little bit, do you think that there will be those out there who would say, though, that what you described initially is part of the sort of natural process of the classroom? So there will be those who will say, don't systemize things. Don't, sort of let things play out a little bit more. Don't have, scripts and systems and processes all the time, and just let things play out, in a natural way, and let the teacher figure it out, let the students figure it out, let everybody develop, if you like, at their own pace. And I know we're talking about a very specific strategy here, cold call, but I'm talking about the general overarching idea that these strategies are authoritarian and not good for the majority of students.
Well, I think
that's
it's
not what I believe, by the way, Zach, but I'm just painting the picture.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, I think there's a reason maybe that these strategies got codified in schools with more disadvantaged or historically underserved communities. Where I work right now, we have 14% of students are at grade level or at where they're supposed to be in math, and 18% in reading. Right. We're in a situation where behavior is affecting their performance. Vaping in the bathrooms, lots of violence. Coordinated attacks on each other through mobile phones. All of that sort of, we have to address problems as that are there. We have to actually fix things. Otherwise, the kids just have one education. And so, cold calling, like you said, is a single, small, tiny strategy in the larger scheme of things in terms of systems and classroom management and attention. But it's what professionals need to do when they're in that type of context. And I think also coming from a private school and or international school background as well, where students are in a privileged situation, you'll see cold calling happen all the time, but the students themselves may, for whatever reason, have come to school already, understanding how to have a conversation in class with their teachers, and they don't really need to be explicitly taught sort of how that looks, where it wasn't apparent here. And so we had to do what was necessary to meet the needs of the kids here.
Yeah, and I guess what you're trying to say is it's contextual. You're saying that, and I think actually I touched on this in my show last Monday when we were talking about what were we talking about? Blimey heck, I need help here, Zach. But it was something else anyway. And we were talking. Oh, I know what it was. Corridors. We were talking about corridors and the way things are structured in corridors. And I was saying that in some schools I've worked in, there wasn't a need to have, silent corridors, for example, or to have very sort of, I suppose what you call very strict and precise guidance for different processes. And I guess that's sort of, I don't know, you can disagree with this, but I think that sort of plays into what you're saying, in that there's been some schools I've worked in that, I've worked in a couple of private schools, private international ones, where if you codified things in the way of, right, we've got this new strategy called cold calling, and this is what it is. I mean, I say it's a new strategy. It's been around since like Jesus was doing the Sermon on the Mount with the disciples, right? I mean, they were like, he was cold calling them. But, let's call it a new branded strategy. Okay. So, in schools like that, for me, there wasn't a need for that. There wasn't a need for silent corridors. There wasn't a need for, sort of controlling what happened. But I've taught in other schools where, like the one you've probably just described that you're in now, where there was a need for something. Now, you can debate what that is all day long, but there are schools out there now, and this is, for me, an argument that will be made by many, if not most people, to say there are schools out there now where they need something to happen to change the course. And that can be debated, what that is and what that looks like, but usually it's going to be something that brings about more opt-in from the community, and whatever those strategies are or those policies are, that's what many schools are striving to achieve. And I guess cold calling, if you want to call it that, is a very small sort of cog in that thing, you know?
Yeah, and I definitely agree more with the Tom Sherrington side of things, right? I think that you can reframe it as about involvement, and I think that's how a lot of people think of it. You said it's like historically it's been it's been since the dawn of man, right? But I think about when I'm sitting with my daughter and teaching her reading every night. She's 4 years old, right? I don't ask her to raise her hand if she knows the answer because in a tutoring situation, we know you continuously cold call, right? It's about scaling it up to a class of 30 kids where you want everybody involved, you want everybody listening, and you also want to involve students that probably wouldn't raise their hand but want to be called on. They want somebody to give them a chance to participate, but they don't want to have to stand out and be that person who's raising their hand trying to get the teacher's attention. And so it's really about creating that ratio and creating that environment that involves everyone.
Last question for you, Zach, and then I'm going to bring in Mar and anybody, maybe Zainab again, or anyone else who wants to chip in again. But do you think, Zach, that the again, there will be an argument to be made here that we as a society have become more aware of the trauma sometimes, or the mental health issues, or the challenges in lots of different ways. We've become more educated on the different um, the differences in students and the way they approach situations, whatever those conditions are or those issues are. We've become more aware of them, and there is that argument that the more we've become aware of, to give you an example, the Autism Society on Slant said that things like tracking the speaker, or being able to respond to questions in cold call, could be inappropriate and too difficult for certain students who have autism, as an example. And to throw that across the whole domain, there will be those who will say the more the more that people are becoming trauma informed, or the more that people are becoming aware of all the different issues, that we need to stop doing things like cold calling. That's what some people will say, that we need to move away from things that put students on the spot because it's too anxiety inducing.
At Bloomsbury Education, we're passionate about supporting teachers with high-quality professional development books from leading experts. Whether you're navigating your first crucial years as an early career teacher, or a more experienced teacher looking to refresh your practice or take a step up into leadership, our award-winning books are here to help. We publish practical books to support teaching across primary and secondary, from the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design. Visit the Bloomsbury Education website at bloomsbury.com/education to find out more, and use code BLOOMTTR24 to save 20% on all education titles. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think fundamentally, I have to believe that most students are more alike than they are different. Similar to, there are people that are gluten intolerant, but we all have similar digestive systems. We have similar cognitive systems, and it is true that you're going to find students that you need to accommodate, and it's your duty as a teacher to discover those things. During a cold calling situation, you do it twice, right? You cold call on a student, and both times that was just a similarly awkward interaction. Right after class, you go, so I called on you a couple of times this past week, and I noticed that there was an issue, with that. Tell me more about that, right? It might be a confidence thing. It might be something that a previous teacher had instilled on this child, and now it's your job to undo it. It might be something that we can have a larger conversation with a counselor, with a parent. But to say that every technique in the playbook, that everything we've developed as a profession is basically, we can throw that out the window because everybody is so different. I just don't buy it.
I mean, I think what they'd say is people aren't different. We've become more aware of the differences. or we should be more aware of the differences.
Yeah, and I
Rather,
appreciate the call for empathy, right? I appreciate the understanding that, that not everybody ticks the same way, right?
yeah, yeah.
I hope that we don't throw that out with kind of the more extreme versions of this, which is, that simply, teachers shouldn't really teach, that we should have everybody choose their own assessment and their own assignments and their own way of learning, and I think that would really kind of be disastrous.
Thanks so much, Zach. That's great. I mean, feel free to hang around. We're still going to sort of go forward and see what else people have to say. But Mark, you're next. Do you have something to say on cold calling?
Yeah, it's a technique that, well, the name seems to come from TLAC. I think, as Zainab mentioned, you kind of need to build up to it. I think Scientific might have said this as well. But another thing from TLAC is this culture of error, where you make your room a safe space to make mistakes in public, and for those to be corrected in a sensitive way, in how the teacher responds, but also how the teacher lets the others respond as well. And where, for example, you shut down anyone that's being unkind, to create that safe space. I think one thing that does help to build that is reading aloud, where you correct just the way they're reading. It's just a nice way to bring that culture of error in. But in terms of this idea around anxiety and speaking aloud in front of your peers, I just think that this idea on the mental health has gone a bit too far. Most students, unless it's explicitly diagnosed, are probably not suffering from that a level of anxiety that is so severe we should leave them out of cold calling. Most are just a bit nervous, and actually the exposure is good for them, and never to cold call them. I'll call enabling. So,
I mean, there will be those who will say though that actually it is, in the sense that any anxiety, any form of anxiety that is, that uncomfortableness, that there is a movement against that, isn't there? By the way, I'm not saying I disagree with you there. I'm just putting across what some people say. They're saying that why, they would say, why do we need to do that? Why do we need to put students on the spot in any way, shape, or form? Why not just avoid anything that makes them feel uncomfortable or, causes them any sort of anxiety or a problem in that way, regardless of who the student is or any condition they may or may not have?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, what I would say to that is, what percentage of students would, for example, volunteer to be in the school play, especially a leading role? And if we build their public speaking confidence, which you can do, they're just more likely to put themselves forwards. Lots of job interviews now involve a group scenario where you have to speak in public. There are plenty of benefits, and letting people opt out of discomfort is probably going to create the kind of cycle that where it does genuinely become a pathological anxiety, which is something we really don't want. We want to show students that actually it's not a big deal to speak out loud. It's not a big deal to get things wrong in front of your peers. Everyone makes mistakes, and that's life. And it's, if you're a bit nervous, it's a great thing to put yourself forwards and try anyway.
Yeah, I mean, this probably echoes what other people said. I don't know whether Zainab or Scientific want to come in on that, or even Zach again, or anybody wants to sort of comment on what Mar's saying. But I think that's something that's been reflected from everyone who's called in tonight, is this idea that, you've got the strategy, but you've also got good teaching. You've also got common sense. You've also got your knowledge of the class, your approach to classroom management. Go on, Zainab.
I agree with you there. I think it all stems down to, overall, you need to get to know the children in your class, because every child is different, and tailor it to whatever your class needs, because none of us, we don't want to induce anxiety. We don't want the students to dread coming into school because they don't want to answer a question.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one, isn't it? Dreading coming into school because of that fear of...
I would hate if a child in my class did not want to, come in, just in case, they get picked on. But it's just, it's up to us to use it according to however our class needs it.
But what if you don't know that someone's hating it?
I think I think we'll pick up on it very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, you might. I'm just thinking further down, like primary. Go on, Zach, or whoever that was. Who was that? Was that just me? And echoing back, probably. But I was saying that there is that element. I guess some people would say that people can mask.
Yes.
I don't necessarily think they might be able to do that in year 3, but like further down the line, they might have a coping mechanism for having to, they might dread it. I mean, I'm just trying to think now, like when I was in school, I dreaded PE. Not because I didn't love sport, because I do really like sport, because my school was a rugby school. So the only sport that was allowed was rugby. Okay. And I became a D team substitute, Zainab. I couldn't get in the D team, so I was on the bench for the D team. Can you believe that? And I literally dreaded it. Like, I hated rugby as a sport. I hated, sort of like some of the sort of cultural things around it. And therefore what I'm saying is, I know it's like a completely different thing. Let's imagine that's like me hating a particular teacher who always uses cold call.
Yeah.
Because I just hate it. Now, but they don't know I hate it. So, for example, I never turned around to a teacher when I was at school and went, I hate rugby and I hate these PE lessons. I never dared to say that to any of them. But I hated it. There'll have been some of my mates or peers who will have just ducked out by saying they were ill and got a note or whatever it was, right? So, yeah, I don't really know what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that, like, as a counter to what you said, I'm saying that you've made a really good point about a student who hates that because they hate it, but whether we should just power on because it's good for them in the long run.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do think it has a really important place in all classrooms. And in the end of the day, we are training the kids to become more confident.
Yeah, scientific. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to butt in again. Yeah, I think that point that was just made there, and also by Mar as well, I think, is we are trying to teach life skills as well as subject content, aren't we? So students are going to go into interviews where they're going to be put on the spot and asked questions, and obviously,
yeah.
The other thing to think about is, why are the students not wanting to be involved in the cold calling? I think it's most likely lack of confidence of the subject. I remember when I was at school, I was very, very, very shy, incredibly introverted, and it still affects me nowadays. To be honest, it's something I have to sort of get over myself. So, but I wanted to be involved in lessons. The issue was my lack of confidence. It didn't mean I didn't want to be involved. I wanted to aspire to be more confident and to get involved. So when I did get involved, I then felt better and more likely to get involved. Whereas if we always say we can't use cold calling just in case there's anxious students, then is that a good enough reason? And I'm going to have to
flip
agree with
Yeah,
Mar there. I just don't
go
think it's a good enough reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, right, we can't use this just in case there's a few anxious students around.
I mean, to flip it round as well, when I was in school, if someone had used cold calling with me, that would have actually been better for me, because actually that would have so there were certain lessons I remember. I'm like, I'm really good at this. I'm in my head, I'm like, I'm really good at this. I'm on this. But there's other students in the class who are maybe more dominant, they're bigger voices, they're, you know, whatever. And I don't really want to compete with them. So I'm just going to sit here. But at the end, I felt a bit deflated. Like I wasn't really involved in that lesson. And actually, I was better than that student. I'm better at that student at what we were doing. I know more.
So would it have helped you, Tom,
Yeah.
for them to say, oh, this is an anxious student. Let's make sure we never cold call. Let's send an email around to all the teachers and say, make sure you never cold call Tom because he's going to be anxious. Would that have helped you?
But the point I'm making, I wasn't anxious about
I see.
that.
I mean, I certainly was.
I'm saying I wasn't.
I certainly was when I was at school, incredibly anxious. And had my teachers never, tried to involve me, I probably wouldn't have been involved, if you see what I mean. So, yeah, that's the point I'm making, is the fact that there's anxiety as a thing isn't a good enough reason to throw away a completely legitimate teaching method just in case there's some students. And it may sound like I'm being really cold and nasty, but that's just how I feel about it.
No, I think with me,
to be
I was the student who was less, who wasn't necessarily anxious, but wasn't wanting to put myself out there in front of and compete with maybe other characters in the class, particularly when I was in Key Stage 3, for example. Right, I got better once I was in Key Stage 4, sixth form. I was building my confidence up, but it wasn't necessarily an anxiety thing. It was more I didn't want to put myself out there in front of these groups of students who.
But was that because the teacher was favouring those students? Because those
I can't remember. If I'm honest with you, I can't remember. But my point is this: my parents and me, I never went to a teacher and said, I'm feeling anxious about whatever. Right? I mean, that was unheard of when I was in school. Honestly, I went to an all boys school. Nobody would have dared to say, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but no one would have said, I'm feeling anxious about questioning in class when I was in school, right or wrong. No one would have done that. And certainly for me, it was more, but I'm saying I would have benefited from when I was in school. I don't remember much cold calling happening. I remember a lot of hands up, if not 90% of the time it was hands up. And I'm saying that I personally would have benefited from more cold calling, because I would have felt that particularly when it's something that I felt I was doing well at, I've got that chance to showcase that in front of the class and build a bit of confidence up and feel like I'm becoming better at it. And that would have benefited me, but that didn't really happen much, I don't think. And again, we forget our school experience. It's interesting, isn't it? Because you just clump together your school experience. I can't remember many individual lessons, for example, or anything like that. But I do remember a lot of the thing. I don't remember cold calling. I think I would remember if there was teachers who did that a lot. And, I don't. I think it's something that is, has been relatively new, I guess, in the sort of, obviously it's not a new teaching strategy. As I said, it's been around since the year dot, just asking students questions, right? That's all it really is. But I'm saying hands up was a more commonly used strategy, wasn't it? I think. So, blooming heck, have we got to the bottom of this or not? Is cold calling okay for teachers to do? I think everyone's going to say yes in it. I don't think anyone's going to say no. But Zainab, is cold calling okay?
Definitely. Obviously, we've got to not just simply cold call, implement other strategies that our class needs. But yes, cold calling is something that I can't see myself not using it in teaching.
Scientific. Is cold calling okay?
Yes, it's definitely okay. With the teacher using professional judgment alongside.
And Ma, is cold calling okay?
Yeah. Yes. Definitely. I do think you need to set a certain culture first, which either the school might have or you might have to instill. But it's not just okay. It's something you should work towards if it's not quite working at the start.
Listen, I had a second topic which I haven't even got a chance to get onto because it's been so interesting to talk about questioning, cold calling, the logistics in the classroom. It's been a riveting conversation. So I want to thank Zainab, Scientific, Ma, Zach, who came on earlier, and everybody else who's contributed on the texts, on the tweets, and so on. So it's been really, really good. This will be available as a podcast at some point if anyone wants to listen to it or share it with anybody who might find the conversation interesting. It'll be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the usual ones. And of course, follow and subscribe to Teachers Talk Radio. Give us a review if you like what we do, please. If you get your podcast from somewhere, then give us a rating. It only takes a second and it's really valuable for us. So yeah, definitely do that if you don't already. And a massive thanks to everyone for listening along. And of course, a final shout out to our sponsors tonight, Teachwell Toolkit. If you're interested in senior mental health lead training for anybody in your school, check out Teachwell Toolkit, teachwelltoolkit.com. Get involved. It's fully DFE funded. It costs the school nothing. So someone in your school can get the senior mental health first aid training and become a qualified mental health first aid instructor. So get involved with that, teachwelltoolkit.com. Listen, we at Teachers Talk Radio have a ton of shows coming up, not just in the week. Toby, unfortunately, isn't on next because he's ill. But in the rest of the week, we've got Hannah tomorrow night at 7:30. We've got Catherine at 9 o'clock. Wednesday, we've got Michelle Hines at 6 p.m. We've got Carrie's not on at 9. But then we've got Brent and Adam Thursday night, 8 p.m. We've got Maxine on Friday, Nazia and Krupa at 7:30, Sabrina at 9 p.m. Saturday, we've got Chris, Graham and Samantha. Sunday, we've got Tom, Chris, Sarah and Omar. So we've got an absolute ton of live shows that you can get involved with, all coming up in the week and beyond. Massive thanks for tuning into this one. I'll be back again next Monday night with more from the education/teaching world. Maybe I can go into my topic that I didn't cover, which was jobs outside teaching versus jobs in teaching. Perhaps that will be the topic next week, but we'll see how we go. Either way, have a great rest of the week and keep teaching and keep doing what you do. Cheers, everyone.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.